Thank you for joining this webinar. This webinar is going to take you through 31 ways of saving time when doing branding research. Don't worry, it'll be quick. Just about everything I show you can be done in Q and Displayer, but I'll be showing it to you in Displayer as Displayer is designed for presentations. If you're new to branding research, you'll get a lot out of the principles and techniques. I'm going to share all the basics. If you're an experienced branding researcher, I hope to show you lots of great ways of saving time, principally by automation. We asked a sample of a little over 2,000 Americans which phone companies they'd heard of. Like most real-world samples, there's a lot of spelling issues. Look here, AT&T, lowercase t, ATT, various spaces added. There's a lot of inconsistencies. So we can't simply just count up the number of times each brand is mentioned. We need to do some kind of categorization dealing with all that variability in how people have spelled and written things. And so number one is use algorithms to do this. So we're going to go into advanced analysis, text analysis, automatic categorization, and choose list of items, which is exactly designed for this problem. I find my spontaneous awareness data, I drag it across, and it will now be using some really cool algorithms to merge together all of the similar brands and count them up. So Verizon's mentioned 1,325 times, and it says there's 18 variants. Let's have a hover over and see what they are. And so you can see in the top row, and you might have to squint, all the different ways people spell Verizon that we've counted up automatically and in the Verizon category. Now, often you need to tweak these things a little bit, and there are lots of options over here, but we'll send you the link to this webinar. You're just about to click the watch now, and that will take you to a webinar about how you can do this. Often in branding research, we ask people to explain something to us. Here, it's why they chose a particular quick service restaurant or fast food restaurant. The automatic categorization that I just showed you before doesn't do well with this type of data. And the reason for that is you need a bit of context to understand which responses are interesting and why. So we can't go with automatic categorization. We need to instead go with semi-automatic categorization. So I'm going to choose the data, the variable. I'm going to go down to text categorization, semi-automatic. And as it says, it's creating the initial categorization, and it might take a few minutes. Don't worry, not going to make you watch. Here is the answer that we'll get to in a few minutes. What Display has done is it's taken all the data and it's come up with 37 different categories. And you might be thinking, I don't want 37 categories, and you shouldn't want 37 categories. The idea is now that you merge the categories or split them or modify them as you need. This is the starting point, which is a lot faster than starting with all of the raw data. You can see here, category 12 says convenient. Let's go have a look. So we can see these are people who have mentioned convenient, and convenient, you know, we can see the 12 showing it's category 12, and we can see what other things they've mentioned by the other numbers. But we've got another category called convenient too. Let's have a look at that. And as you can see, these are people who have said related words like convenience, or they've misspelt convenient. To the algorithm, it doesn't know if this is a substantive difference that we care about or not. So it's chosen to be conservative and treat them separate, but we can just delete and merge them together. It's the basic process of semi-automatic categorization. Again, the webinar link that we'll send you will give you much more detail about how to do it. Branding research studies typically collect various brand health metrics, and these can be ordered. Now, you order them so you can compare them. Classic ordering is awareness must precede consumption. Consideration usually follows from having tried it before, and eating regularly follows from it being a brand that you're willing to consider. So there's an order between these brand health metrics. And Principle number 3 is we should compare such things. One of the ways to compare them is to compute conversion, which is just dividing one by the other. So we might want to divide the ever eaten column by, and I'm holding down my shift, the aided awareness, choose divide, and I'll just drag that down a little. Put some decimal points on it. So we can see that 95 divided by 98 is 96, or 96% of people that are aware of Arnold's went on to eat it. And the reason we look at these conversion numbers is it makes it easier to compare. So we can see, for example, that Arnold's conversion is much, much higher than Breadbasket. So Breadbasket's got some problem. Maybe they've got poor distribution. Maybe there's just something intuitively unappealing about their brand. Who knows? Now, automatically creating brand health tables is step number 5, and there's a nice option in both Q and Display for a specialty table called a brand health table. Now we can go and select the options from here, but a little super efficient way you can use is you expand out the previous page, which has those tables, and then I'm just going to drag them one by one onto this gizmo, whatever it's called. Widget, that's what I was after. And so let me drag that last one across. So I clearly released the wrong spot. So it's now, Display has now automatically put together those tables, and even if they're all in different order, it will automatically merge them to create a nice table like this. Some people like to convert that into a visualization like this, and I'll show you how. A funnel, small multiples funnel. And so you can create that, thank you, Matilda. And I can hook that up, oops, to my brand health. And so now I've got a small multiple of funnels, which I could tidy up. If we want to automatically convert all the conversions, we can do that in one step by just going here and changing output to stages and conversion. That's all super time saving, isn't it? Another webinar to look at talks about finding the story in your survey data. And in it, I explain 8 basic principles. The first of these is to delete uninteresting analyses, and it's just as relevant in branding research as any other kind of research. Now, if you're a beginner, uninteresting can be a little bit hard to know what that really means. Unfortunately, there's a general theory. A result is interesting if there's a big difference between the observed result and the expected result. How do we work that out? There's a great theory about this, and it's called double jeopardy. And it says if a brand is poor on one metric, it will generally be poor on all other metrics. So double jeopardy gives us a clue about how we should do things. Now, move on to, we're going to come back to double jeopardy lots of times, but we'll move on to a quick implication, which is idea number 10, which is that we should order our data by market share, or anything similar to market share, from highest to lowest. And the logic of this flows directly from double jeopardy. If a brand's poor on one metric, it's going to be poor on others. The key metric in a lot of markets is market share. So if a brand's got poor market share, it's going to be poor on other metrics. So by ordering by market share, it'll be easier for us to understand the expected results. Now that might sound a bit theoretical, so we'll do it in practice. We'll go back to the original table here. These are sorted alphabetically. I'm going to sort it now, descending by market share. We go back to our brand health tables that we created before, and I'm going to have to tell it now that I want to, so I'll select it and I'll go down here and I want to sort by row 4, which is eaten last month, which is what I've used as my proxy for market share. So I'm going to sort by row 4. And you'll see here, I've now got this brand health table sorted from highest market share, or my proxy for market share, to lowest. Now, this double jeopardy says everything else should be in the same order, and therefore any exceptions to that could be interesting. And if you look at the conversion in the bottom row, which is the proportion of people that considered that went to buy in the last month, we see we do have a massively big score for Arnold's of 121%. It's quite unusually strong. And we can see that goes all the way down to 71% and then up to 88%. So double jeopardy, these should be decreasing numbers. That they're not decreasing tells us that Pret has got particularly poor conversion when we take this idea of double jeopardy into account. And we'll get more information about that shortly. So order by market share. I've already shown you that it's useful to show brand health data as funnels. Here I've actually overlaid the conversion data onto it and tried to make it all look pretty with little colors highlighting the ones that are most relevant. Now, while the conversion numbers give a lot of insight, they actually make a non-obvious implicit assumption. When we divide one metric by another, we're implicitly assuming that we expect one metric to be a proportion of the other. The double jeopardy says nothing about proportionality. It just says that if one metric's bad, another's bad. So when we're looking at the conversion percentages, we are implicitly assuming that double jeopardy manifests itself in terms of what's called a proportional pattern, which is this shape here. But when you actually look at data, you tend to find there are lots of other patterns that can be formed. And to make this a little more concrete, we'll move on to recommendation 12, which is gain deeper insights by looking at pairs of metrics and labeled scatter plots. So go visualization, scatter, labeled scatter. And we're going to hook this up. I'm going to drag across on my x-axis consideration. On my y-axis, I'm going to put eaten in the last month. Make it a bit easier to read. Going to increase the font sizes. Get the axes a bit bigger too. All right. So can you see that these are forming a kind of straight line? So this is again consistent with this double jeopardy thing that we're talking about, and you'll tend to find it's really common that your market will have this kind of pattern. I'm going to draw a line through it to make it all really obvious. And you can see I'm able to draw a line that fits through the vast majority of the points highly accurately. If you want, you can use techniques like regression, but just doing it by eye is always actually good enough. Now, this is not the proportional one, and we can see that because the line's not passing through the 0, 0 point. So this is corresponding to this linear relationship. We can see here that most of the brands are exactly on it, so they're consistent with the rule, but we can see things that are jumping out. So Pret, we already knew had poor conversion from considered to ever eaten, but what we didn't know was that Arnold's is actually exceptionally good. It's vastly outperforming the expected result or the prediction of double jeopardy. We can see that Pizza Heaven and Burger Shack, and to an extent Mars Burgers, are also relatively weak. So we're starting to get much more granular insight into the performance of the brands. Now, on this visualization, I'm just plotting the answer to one question, did they consider a brand, by another question. But you can always derive more complicated metrics. One of the classic frameworks for looking at brands is the BCG, or Boston Consulting Group matrix, where on the x-axis we have relative market share, on the y-axis we have growth rate. If you look at this data, you can see that Breadbasket's in the #1 spot in terms of growth, with very small market share, so we're going to expect it to move to the right over time. And we get to recommendation 14, which is build dashboards to help clients self-serve. So the client can answer questions like, what's the story in Latin America? In which case they learn that in Latin America, actually Burger Shack is absolutely killing it. So far, we've been using pairs of metrics to compare brands. We can also compare customers for a single brand using pairs of metrics. For example, the basic brand vulnerability matrix, which I'm showing here, compares brand usage by brand attitude. And it's the same basic process. We compare expectations with what we observe. You would expect that if somebody likes a brand, they're going to use it a lot. If they dislike a brand, they're not going to use it much. Okay, so that's the basic idea here. If we look at this particular chart table here, we're now looking at it for the Arnold's brand, and we're looking at customers. I'm going to focus on the bottom right corner. Customers have got a positive brand attitude but aren't using. That's 13% of the market, and Arnold shares 0% in this segment. Why aren't they using? Well, we can find out what their needs are. They want Southern fried chicken. They want chicken, they want burritos, meals, dinners, and family boxes. And so the recommendation becomes really simple for Arnold's. If they want to grow their share, an opportunity is to move into kind of chicken, Mexican type menus at the dinner time. Another law, duplication of purchase law, says that the proportion of buyers that switch to a particular brand is determined by the brand's market share. Move on to recommendation number 17, which is look at brand switching data to compare and to understand this duplication of purchase law. How do we do it? The bottom row of this table shows the market share of my brand. So AT&T's got a market share of 21%, Verizon's got a market share of 20%. The duplication of purchase law is telling us that we'd expect when people switch brand in this market, 21% will switch to AT&T. Row 2 of the table is showing people who were with Verizon and switched. 29% of them switched from Verizon to AT&T. So this is a long way above the 21%. So observe 29% higher than expected, 21%. So that's an interesting result. T-Mobile also very high level of switching, relatively speaking. But if we go down here, we can see Straight Talk, 13%, well below 21%. This tells us that Straight Talk, which is a cheap brand, is less competitive with AT&T, which is a premium brand. And so we're quickly getting insights. Now, sometimes it can be useful to summarize brand switching tables to get as market structure maps by changing the visualization and moving then to dimension reduction. And we choose this special option called correspondence analysis of a square table. Now, a square table is a table where the rows and the columns have the same labels. So it's just a special algorithm designed for that. And the closer things are together, the more likely they are to be competitors. Now, there's a little warning that's come up here telling us that we should change some settings here. So we're going to listen to that, and we're going to go down and we're going to change it to show total percent. And so the closer two brands are together, the more likely they are to be competitors, everything else considered. Now, I say everything else, but a little tip, and I encourage you to check out the webinar here. When you do brand switching data, the maps tend not to explain high amounts of variance. So this one here is only explaining 30 plus 20, so it's explaining approximately 50% of the variance in the data. And so a lot of key patterns are missing from this map. And so you'd want to refer to the original table. When we do other forms of correspondence analysis with other types of data, they tend to do a better job. Recommendation number 19 is use software designed for brand attribute or brand association tables. So brand association or brand attribute table shows brands by various other metrics. If you're familiar with this type of data, you'll know that this is actually underlying, got 8 times 7, so 56 variables underlying it. It's actually quite hard to analyze it unless using software specifically designed for it. And if you are using software specifically designed for it, it allows you to very quickly do things like use small multiples, which we're going to do. So I'm going to drag across my year variable, create a massive crosstab. So I've got to scroll by, and it's really too big to read, but I can visualize it using small multiples. So I'm going time series. And I've now got this great visualization. I say great from an informational point of view rather than a presentational point of view, where if I look at Arnold's, I can see that Arnold's has got a statistically significant decrease in the good value for money over time. So I've quickly looked at heaps of data and found the big stories in it. I can also put demographics in place and time, have a different type. And so we can see that Arnold's is stronger amongst the females, particularly in terms of these attributes here, which are color-coded, where the color code means statistically significant. So same in histotype. I want you to look now at Arnold's versus Nuovo. What can you see? The big thing you should be seeing is Arnold's is bigger on just about everything. Not just about, on exactly everything. Why is that? Well, it's because of that double jeopardy, which we were talking about before. If you're strong on one thing, you tend to be strong on everything. And that's the case. Arnold's is just stronger on all metrics than Nuovo. Now, we already knew that from the market share and all that brand health data. So looking at the brand associations here and going, yeah, it tells us that Arnold's a bigger brand isn't so interesting. So we need to find a way of removing the double jeopardy kind of effect from this data. The first thing we do is we calculate the sum of the rows. And you'll notice here that the sum of the rows for Arnold's is much bigger than for Nuovo. So this is a good summary measure, and this is sometimes called the brand effect. It's telling us there's a very strong brand effect describing this table. You can also do the attribute effect, showing us which attributes tend to have more percentages associated with them. And once you've got these two sums, you can start to compute an expected value for Arnold's on care about quality of their food, for example, by just looking at the observed brand effect and the attribute effect. And the way we can do it, and I'm going to do this by hand first, and then I'll show you how to automate it. So I'm inserting a calculation, and I just type my expected effect equals to quality effect times by the Arnold's brand effect divided by the overall total. And so I would expect a score of 32.6. We got a score of 25, so our observed score is less than the expected score, so that's interesting. Arnold's, it would suggest to us, is relatively weak once you remove the brand effects or care about the quality of the food. Let's calculate that, and that's usually called a residual, this calculation. So we're going to go residual equals the observed effect minus, I'll click on my keyboard to do the minus, expected effect, click off. And so this is the residual. Now, you don't want to do them all one by one. So there's a shortcut for doing it using code, but don't worry for you non-code writers. I'm going to show you a shortcut where we use no code shortly, but some people like to do it. So the shortcut way of doing it is say, I'm going to choose the whole table minus, especially with code, chi-squared test of the table again, pull out the expected values. And so now I've got all of the residuals for everything. Now, if you're a great statistician, you'll have noticed that I've made an assumption here, which is certainly not true. What is that? Well, I was using the chi-squared test, but the chi-squared test, and that's the implicit assumption of how these expected values are computed, technically assumes that the columns are mutually exclusive, but they're not. People can have data in multiple columns, it's a multiple response. So the chi-squared test is not technically accurate. There are more accurate ways of calculating the expected value. In general, it's not worth learning about how they work because the difference is really small, but both display and can use one of these more accurate methods, which involves fitting a log linear model. And so rather than having to write any code or anything, we can just click on our table and go cells and click on expected and residual, and it's going to give us this more accurate expected value and the more accurate residual, and it's going to put them in. Let's just look at the residuals. So now we've quick as a flash got the residuals, no need to write code. And if we want to see if they're statistically significant, the default significance tests actually are testing these residuals on this type of brand table, which is great. So we can quickly see that Arnold's is really strong in terms of easy to eat when you're on the go, and weak in terms of quality of food, best tasting food, and food being fresh. Now, having all these residuals often creates a problem because they're almost all significant. So it's too much data. We need to summarize it some way. One way we can do it is we can do traditional correspondence analysis, which is just designed, and it computes those same residuals in the background, literally using the same method, and then it uses a special dimension reduction algorithm. So let's do it. Going to go dimension reduction, correspondence analysis of the table. And so we've quickly got the table. Now, if you want to know how to read this correctly, check out the webinar. I would just alert you that it's not correct to just look at how close things are together. There's a different type of visualization, which is actually point 25, which is to use the Moonplot. And it doesn't look quite as sexy, but it's very hard to misread it, and it's a bit smarter. It's giving us a warning here. It's saying I need to change a setting called normalization to row principal scaled. And now the way I read this is I can see that Lucky's and Nero's are close to good value and affordable, whereas Pret is about having healthy food options. So we're very quickly getting a summary from this data. Technique 27, use driver analysis to understand attribute importance. To do this, you need to have some measure of preference, such as how frequently they buy or how much they like the different brands, which you tend to have in a brand attribute study. And you need to have these brand associations, which we've also got. And I've done here a driver analysis using Shapley regression from memory, and it's showing us that taste is the #1 driver. Another webinar will tell you how to do all of this. So this is one great summary on its own, but we can combine it with the correspondence analysis using, say, the bubble size to indicate the importance of the attributes to create a great market map. It's often useful. Let me just resize this all go here. It's often useful to use radar charts to summarize brand associations. Now, some of you will be thinking radar charts are terrible charts. You should never use them. Notice that it's not a normal radar chart. This is a small multiple, so I've got one for each brand. Also, I'm going to have to modify the underlying data to make the patterns clearer, because the patterns aren't quite clear enough here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with the order which the rows in my columns appear, with this specific goal of making these patterns clearer. But rather than have you watch me do it, I've already done it. And so I've reordered them so that they form closest I can get to circles. Now, what you call these, or the kind of jargon of these, is they're footprints. And the idea is we can compare brands based on the footprint that's formed. And we can only do it if they're reasonably smooth curve, shapes. They can't do it if they're super jagged like before, which is why I had to rearrange the rows and columns. And if you look at this one here, you can see quickly that Coke and Pepsi, the shape of the footprints are the same, which tells us that Coke and Pepsi in broad terms have the same positioning. The size of Coke's footprint is bigger than Pepsi's footprint, telling us that Coke has got a stronger level of brand associations, and this is that effect we talked about before of double jeopardy coming in. Now contrast that to Pepsi Max and Coke Zero. Their shape is completely different. It's a different footprint. They're broadly similar. They're indexing on rebellious, open to new experiences, health conscious and weight conscious, but we can see that in general, Coke Zero footprint is a little bit bigger, but weaker in terms of open to new experiences and rebellious. So while Coke Zero and Pepsi Max are broadly similar, Coke Zero more skews to the health dimension and Pepsi Max more to the rebellious and open to new experiences dimension. When we look at Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi, they're also sharing that health conscious and weight conscious dimension with Pepsi Max and Coke Zero, but they're stronger skewing towards these more feminine type of dimensions, with Diet Pepsi in particular for innocent and sleepy. So footprints, I think they're really cool. Even better than a footprint, but more exotic, is the palm tree visualization. Just like with the previous visualization, we're using the radar plot, we can draw conclusions based on the shape of the leaves. So these two here look a bit like rabbits, and if we hover over them, we see that these two ears correspond to traditional and older. Pepsi Max and Coke Zero, very similar shapes again, telling us they're similar, same Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi. This has got a few advantages over the radar chart. One is it works for many more brands. The radar charts, when you've got too many brands or too many attributes, quickly become unusable. These palm trees scale much better because most of the information is in the tooltip, the general shape. The second thing is they allow you to show the brand effect by the height of the palm tree, which can be useful. Recommendation number 31 is automatically update your trackers. So rather than manually doing everything, you can save heaps of time by automatically updating them. Here's a tracker for Burger Chef. I've got a whole lot of metrics on this page. Note it says data is coming from up to September 2017, and my most recent score for burgers consumed in the last month was 83%. I'm going to swap that out with a new file, which will go up to December. And so you can see it's automatically updated the title up here. It's going to December. The number changed here to A3. All the other charts updated. That was a lot faster than doing it by hand, wasn't it? We will send you a recording of the video, and we will send you the presentation with all the links to the other presentations. Thank you very much for joining the webinar, everybody, and for all of our customers out there. Thank you for being our customers. Bye now.